Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We start with the first IGCSE paper of 0610 Biology MCQ paper, and this is the one which is going to be examined in July. So let's get ready and let's start working on it. Now, as you all know, this paper is for 45 minutes. Now, the other biology papers are for 1 hour, but the IGCSE multiple choice extended, which is paper 2, this is paper 2 is for 45 minutes and you have 40 MCQs and there are 40 questions and you have to do 40 MCQs. So you've got nearly a minute, but then you need some time for revision as well. So you've got to do it very hurriedly. Looking at question 1, woodlice are small organisms that live in damp places. In an experiment, 3 live woodlice are put into a glass container. The diagram shows what happens after 30 minutes. So they were put into a glass container, and then after some time, what happens is the diagram shows what happens after 30 minutes. So they've all moved here to the damp side. So this side is the dry side, and this side is the damp side. So they've all moved they're used to living in damp places. So they've moved to the damp side, and this shows what? This shows sensitivity. Just like if you enter a room, it's very hot, and you switch on the fan or the air conditioner. So you're sensitive to that temperature. So it shows sensitivity. It doesn't show growth. It doesn't show nutrition. It doesn't show respiration. Respiration is the release of energy. So it doesn't show any of either of these, but it shows sensitivity because when they were placed in it, they had the choice to move to the dry side or to the damp side. So the fact that they were sensitive, then they moved to the damp side. Question 2, which species can breed with Brunella vulgaris to produce fertile offsprings? Now it will be neither of them because one is Prunella modularis and one is Vespula vulgaris. So they're all different. So they won't breed together and won't produce fertile if they're not of the same species. So this is of course neither of them. So the answer to this was D. Then coming on to question number 3, what is the correct order of arthropod groups from those with the most legs to those with the fewest legs? So this was the most legs, and then of course this was the one with the fewest legs at the end. So it will be most here and few here. Now the answer to that, of course, you've got to remember, you've got to memorize this, that it was myriapods, crustaceans, arachnids, and insects. So this is the order in which they would, of course, have the most legs and the fewest legs. So this is, of course, something which you need to learn, and you need to go back onto this chapter and revise that chapter to be able to understand this, which are the most legs and which are the least number of legs. Question 4. The diagram shows 4 animal cells as seen under the light microscopes. What will be present at X? There will be 2 cell membranes. Can't be the cell wall because it's animal cells. So can't have cell wall, can't have 1 cell membrane, it will be 2 cell membranes. I can't have 2 cell walls. So the answer was 2 cell membranes. Then coming on to question number 5. Now in question 5 it says the diagram shows a root hair cell. How is this cell modified for the absorption of water? So it has a cellulose cell wall which is fully permeable. It has a thin layer of cytoplasm. It has a large surface area. It has a large vacuole. So basically the condition which makes it absorption of water, when you want something to absorb water, you want a large surface area so that it will absorb water more readily and quickly. Then coming on to question number 6. Now question number 6 says a student draws a diagram of a mitochondrion. The diagram has a magnification of x 20,000. The diagram is 5 centimeter long. What is the actual size of the mitochondrion? It's very basic and very simple. Diagram is 5 centimeter long. So 5 centimeter means 5 centimeter is equal to 50 millimeter because 1 centimeter is equal to 10 millimeter. And then 1 millimeter is equal to 1000 micrometer. So if it was 5 centimeter, means it was 50 millimeter, which means if you multiply it by 3, add another 3 zeros, it will be 50,000 micrometer. But then the magnification was 20,000, so you divide it by the magnification and you get the answer of 2.5 micrometer. You have to understand is that you have to convert it into the whatever is the answers were all in micrometers. So you needed to figure that out and you needed to convert it into micrometers. Then coming on to question number 7, a jar of air was placed upside down on top of a jar containing a brown gas as shown. So there's air and there's a brown gas and then the air and the brown gas after 1 hour. Which process has taken place? Diffusion has taken place both upwards and downwards, diffusion downwards only, diffusion upwards only, diffusion and osmosis. So it was a gas, so osmosis could not have taken place. And then there was air, so some of the air has gone down, and so diffusion was both upwards and downwards because it has equally spread now, the brown gas. Then coming on to question number 8. Question number 8, which row describes active transport? Active transport is lower concentration to high concentration and energy is needed from respiration. So it is very easy because active transport is low to high and energy is needed. So D was the answer. Then number 9, the bases on one strand of a DNA molecule have the sequence C, A, G, C, T. What is this frequency of bases on the other strand? Now you know C always pairs with G, A always pairs with T, G always pairs with C, and C with G, and T with A. That's a base pairing rule at G, C. So if you have T on this side, you will have A on this side. If you have G on this side, you will have C. If you have C on this side, you will have G on this side. So it was very easy to figure out G, T, C, D, G, A, and this was the answer to it. This is how you would figure this out. Question 10. The graph shows the effect of temperature on the rate of an enzyme controlled reaction. So you can see the temperatures are increasing this side. So say this was 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. And then the rate was increasing 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. Which statements are correct? The collision frequency between substrate and enzyme increases between X and Y. The collision frequency between substrate and enzyme increases between X and Y. The shape of the active site is altered between Y and Z. The enzyme is denatured irreversibly at X and Z. Well, this one was wrong. So the answer was only 1 and 2, and that was B. Then coming to question number 11. Now, which graph represents the effect of pH on the activity of a digestive enzyme? You know, it's a very narrow pH. It couldn't have been this because as the pH changes, the enzyme is needed. So you get a typical graph like that, which is also the sort of the same graph for temperature, but you know, this is a very narrow range. In a temperature graph, you have a wider range, like in this MCQ here, the range is very, very wide here. So this was a temperature graph as compared to this pH graph is a very narrow range. So the answer to this was B. It couldn't have been any of these because it's increasing with the pH. This has decreased and then increased, and this is of course decreasing and then remaining low. So there is always a pH is an optimum pH, so it increases before the optimum and then it decreases after the optimum pH. That's a very typical pH and temperature graph for enzymes. Question 12, in which process is oxygen a waste product? You know, in leaves, carbon dioxide enters, so CO2 plus H2O in the presence of light and chlorophyll gives you glucose C6H12O6 plus oxygen. So, which process oxygen is a waste product? In active transport, nothing is a waste product, of course. An aerobic respiration, it's, what is it? Glucose plus oxygen give you carbon dioxide and water. That's the waste product. In anaerobic respiration, depends. If it's in humans, it's lactic acid. If it's in yeast, it's ethanol and carbon dioxide. In photosynthesis, oxygen is the waste product, and that is what is going to Diffuse out of the leaf. Don't say move out of the leaf. Please say diffuse out of the leaf. Question 13. Which layer in the leaf contains interconnecting air spaces? Now that was very easy. A was the upper epidermis, B was the palisade mesophyll, and C was the spongy mesophyll, which of course contains the air spaces. So the answer was C. D was the lower epidermis, which contains the stomata. So if a question was like which layer in the leaf has the openings to allow the diffusion of oxygen, well, you'd have to say layer D then. Then where does egestion take place? And you know egestion takes place at the anus. So B is, of course, they're showing you the buccal cavity. A is the duodenum. C is the pancreas. And D is the anal canal. And just above this would be the rectum where the feces are stored. 15, the diagram shows a fat globule P in one part of the alimentary canal and the same fat globule as it appears in another part of the alimentary canal. You can see there's a P globule and then Q is sort of broken up into smaller pieces. In which part of the alimentary canal are P and Q found? Now P could be found anywhere. It says duodenum, ileum, esophagus, rectum, and the Q is stomach, esophagus, ileum, and ileum. So you remember if it's a fat globule, now this can't reach the large intestine. So it has to stay somewhere, it will be where it's going to be absorbed. So it had to be the ileum. So the answers were C or D. And it couldn't be the rectum because everything is absorbed in the ileum. There's nothing in the rectum, it's just the undigested food, which is the cellulose and the lignin. So the answer was C, which is esophagus. So this would be in the esophagus. We could have also had this in the stomach. And ileum would be, of course, the part where, of course, it would be absorbed and these smaller globules would be digested by the enzyme lipase and converted to fatty acids and glycerol and then enter the lacteals. Then coming to question number 16. In 16, the diagram shows enzymes and the products of the reactions they catalyze. So, I mean, I would have just come up with one and I would have said, fix that up in a minute. I would have said protease has to be amino acids. Now, if you look at it, there's only one of these which has protease into amino acids. Only one of this has an option like that, and this was this one. You see, this one is wrong again. This one is wrong again. And this one is wrong again. So, I mean, just looking at it once again, protease is the amino acids. Now, of course, the amylase would result in simple sugars. And then the lipase would result in fatty acids and glycerol. So this is how you would be able to figure this out. Now, please understand, if you have understood the chapter on digestion, then only you can do this question. Otherwise, you're going to struggle with it. So you need to be really going through it. If you are not clear, you need to go through the video on digestion, which is in the O-level biology part. So you can go through the videos. They're the same in both the syllabuses. Question 17. Which statement about a function of xylem tissue is correct? It carries glucose. Now that's the phloem. It is the only transport tissue in the plant. No, there's xylem and phloem. It carries water away from the leaves. No, that's not the case. It's carrying water from the soil into the root hair cells, into the root, and then up the stem and into the leaves. So it helps to support stem and leaves. Then we're coming on to question number 18. What is part of the definition of transpiration? The loss of water vapor from plant leaves by evaporation of water at the surfaces of the mesophyll cells. Now I'll tell you why it isn't B, C, and D, because you have to understand this. I often get these comments at the end of my videos, and I want you to be clear why it is not B, C, and D. Now the fact that it is not B is the movement of molecules into the cells of the organism where they are used. I mean, no, that's not transpiration. The movement of particles through a cell membrane from a region of lower concentration to a region of higher concentration. Again, transpiration is water vapor. Then the transport of mineral ions from the roots. No, sorry, that is, yes, they do enter by active transport into the root hair cell, but that is not the definition of transpiration. So you had to figure these out and you had to see why it was B, C, and D were wrong. You must know it. You can't be just memorizing it. Then coming on to question number 19. The diagram shows the circulation of blood in an organism. The diagram shows the circulation of blood in an organism. So we have heart, capillaries, heart, capillaries, heart. Here we have oxygen entering, here we have carbon dioxide exiting, and then in these capillaries we have carbon dioxide entering and oxygen coming out. So in which part of the organism is the location of the capillaries in the box? Now this was the one with the box in which oxygen is entering. So it had to be, if capillaries are carrying the blood, so if oxygen is entering the blood, it had to be the lungs. It couldn't be anything else. So it's not these, they're not talking about these capillaries, the ones which are not in a box. They were talking of the ones which was boxed. This was boxed. This was the one which was boxed. So it had to be the lungs, it couldn't be anything else. And in which part is the location of the capillaries in the box, and shows the circulation of blood in an organism. And question 20. Question 20. The photomicrograph shows human blood. Which blood components can carry out the process of phagocytosis? Well, there was only A, because phagocytes are these ones which have a lobed nucleus. D is the plasma, C is the red blood cell, and B is the lymphocyte. So lymphocytes make antibodies. So if I had the answer at B, I would have said which component shows the process of making antibodies. D would have been which part of the blood contains the hormones which are carried in the plasma, or carries the proteins. Plasma proteins are carried in the plasma, or glucose is carried in the plasma. So the glucose dissolves in the plasma, the amino acids are carried. So if that I'd ask you glucose and amino acid, then you'd have to give me the answer D. Question 21. Which diagram shows how a vaccination can lead to long-term immunity? We're all getting vaccinated these days, so we need to be clear about it. Number one, antigen is injected, lymphocytes multiply, antibodies produced, memory cells produced. This was wrong. Memory cell is never injected, antibodies never injected, antigen is injected. So it could have been either this one or this one. Lymphocytes produced, sorry. You see, lymphocytes are never produced, they're already there. And this was memory cells multiplies. This was sort of not in the right sequence. You got the sequence wrong. It says antigen injected, lymphocytes multiply, they're already there. So lymphocytic selection takes place and then cloning, and then antibodies are produced and memory cells are produced. So you had to know the sequence. This is the sequence in which it happens. And question 22, air entering human lungs contains approximately 21% oxygen and 0.0% carbon, 4% carbon dioxide. Which row shows the concentration of these gases in air leaving the lungs? So you know oxygen gets 16% and the carbon dioxide is then 4%. So you had to know this is which leaving the lungs. So when it's leaving the lungs, the percentage of oxygen in expired air would be 16% and a carbon dioxide would be 4%. This is something factual, you know this. After running a fast race, a student had pains in their leg muscles. The pain was caused by the buildup of product of anaerobic respiration. Which product caused the pain? Everybody knows lactic acid, and that lowers the pH and results in muscle cramps. 24. The diagram shows the production and excretion of materials from the human body. Cells producing carbon dioxide, and then X, then amino acids, then liver, then W, then there's something Y, and then Y goes to Z, and then excess salt goes to Z as well. What are V, W, X, Y, and Z of the diagram? So we know that the process in the body cells is aerobic respiration, and that results in the production of carbon dioxide. And then W, liver, amino acids, when they go to the liver, what could W be? W is deamination. And then X was the lungs, because carbon dioxide is exhaled out of the lungs. And deamination, so Y, what does it produce? Liver produces urea. So Y is urea. And then Z, where the excess salts are also removed, is the kidneys. So a little difficult question, but if you had figured it out what was what, it was easy, because you see you had to come out the excess salts and the kidney. So carbon dioxide, V, had to be aerobic respiration. So it could have been C or D. And then, of course, you had deamination. W was the choice of deamination and filtration. X, of course, was lungs and urea. And X, of course, you knew had to be lungs. So lungs was in two cases. So you did narrow it down to C very easily. It wasn't very difficult to narrow it down to C. Then 25. What is the function of a synapse? To allow impulses to travel in both directions. No, synapses only allow travel in one direction. To release vesicles into the synaptic gap. No, there's a presynaptic neuron and then there's a postsynaptic neuron. And this is called the synapse. So synapse allows one-way transmission. To release vesicles, the vesicles actually exocytoses, they release the chemical. The vesicles are not released into the synaptic gap. And to transport neurotransmitters by osmosis. Sorry, osmosis is only for water. And then we come to question 26. Hormones and the nervous system both control our bodies. Which statement about the control provided by our hormones is correct? Fast response and long lasting, fast response and short lived, slow response and long lasting. You see, your hormones, growth hormones are produced and they have an effect, and you grow and you remain tall for the rest of your life. So, slow response and long lasting, slow response and short lived. So, what we need to understand is both hormones and the nervous system control our bodies. But which statement about the control provided by hormones is correct? Nervous control is, of course, very, very fast. Now I want to straighten my arm, so I'll straighten it. It's fast response and short lived, and then again I bend my arm at the elbow. So if I straighten my arm, well, my arm is not going to remain straight all the life, all the day. So A is wrong, and fast response and short lived is more for the nervous system. Now hormones are slow response and long lasting, because hormones will work for a very long time. Growth hormone, you become taller and you remain tall. So slow response and long lasting. We'll continue this in the next video, and we will finish the rest of the questions, which is question 27 to 40 in the next video, and you can see the explanations in that video. Thank you.